Good afternoon and welcome. It gives me great pleasure to kick off this exciting session hosted by the Sustainable Banking Network, otherwise known as SBN, and with IFC as the Secretariat and Technical Advisor. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Georgina Baker. I'm the IFC Vice President for Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, and Central Asia. And I'm stepping into the impressive shoes of Ethiopia's Tafara as the new official IFC head of the SBN Secretariat. Ethiopius, let me take the opportunity to say thank you very much for everything you've done to date. And I will be turning to you for advice, I am sure, as I continue in this role. IFC is leaving IFC, but he's taking up a new role in the World Bank Group as Vice President of the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, or MIGA, and I'm hoping he will continue to support us from there. He's nodding, all is good in the world. For my part, I've been in several leading positions of IFC's work with financial markets over the past 2 decades. So I may be new to SBN, but I've been a champion of sustainable finance at different times for IFC. For example, I led the partnership with the Financial Times for the Sustainable Banking Awards. I introduced climate smart trade finance when I built and ran IFC's Global Trade Finance Program. When I was in IFC's Treasury, I built the partnership with the Milken Institute to train future leaders from central bank in emerging and developing markets. In my current role as the regional VP, I engage with central banks and banking associations on a regular basis, and I'm happy to see many of them in the room today. But I'm not the only one who is new to the SBN family. We have the pleasure of welcoming 3 new members: the Central Bank of Iraq. No, not here. No, not here. Aha, the empty chair. Soon coming. The Central Bank of Egypt. Thank you. And the Central Bank of Samoa. Thank you. It's very exciting to see familiar as well as new faces in the room. It speaks to the deep community of this network as well as continuous growth. Today gives us the ideal opportunity to celebrate the launch of SBN's second Global Progress Report. Where is it? We will have it. There we go. Dun, ta-da. And 30 country reports. It is the most comprehensive benchmarking to date of national efforts to promote sustainable finance across emerging markets. And I'd like to use this moment to extend sincere appreciation and congratulations to all of you for your input and commitment to this work. Rong will tell us a little bit more about the report in her introduction. Today's session is an informal and interactive opportunity for us to reflect on the key findings of this report and to share our experience. In particular, what are the key impacts achieved at the operational level in the financial markets of your country, and what key challenges remain? It's also important to discuss what SBN should focus on over the next 2 to 3 years. Finally, I have the pleasure of welcoming my IFC and World Bank colleagues to the room today. They will be listening carefully to understand what you have learned in your country experiences and how the World Bank Group can continue to support you effectively in these efforts. And with that, I'd like to officially kick off today's session by handing over to Rong. Many thanks, and I look forward to working with you all in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. My name is Rong Zhang. I'm the Global Coordinator for the SBN. It's great to see some old friends and the new members. So I have 5 slides, but you also have a copy on the table, so you don't worry about some of the images. As you know, we launched the first progress report and 10 country reports in February 2018. I'm excited to present the key finding of the second progress report and the 30 country progress report. Georgina showed you the global. Look at this 220 pages of 30. It's okay. And this report, I want to emphasize, are joint efforts of all the SBN members, led by the SBN Measurement Working Group. And the co-chairs, I saw China is there, and 14 countries together. And the content also comes from the members. Here is the SBN map. Since 7 years since its establishment, SBN has grown into a major force for sustainable finance. During the interviews with the members for this year's report, members reaffirmed what they think about SBN's unique strengths. Number 1, emerging market focus. Second, it's a public-private partnership between the financial regulators and banking association. Just look at the room. And third is a commitment to practical peer learning and the support between the members. And the fourth is the collective development of insightful thought leadership. Last but not least is access to also IFC's technical assistant and support from IFC as a practitioner, also standard setter. Before going to the specific findings, I particularly want to highlight one common success factor cited by our members. That is the critical role of public-private partnership to align their national efforts with the global sustainable development and the climate goals. And in emerging markets, banks hold assets estimated at more than $15 trillion and are responsible for 90% of all financing in these countries, and they have the potential to play a very big difference in financing sustainable development. And this report captured the banking reform from 38 countries, representing 80% of the banking assets in all emerging markets. So the measurement framework was developed by members and draw on international good practice, but also members' their own experience. The framework is comprised of 3 pillars. First, strategic alignment. Second, climate and green finance. And third, the ESG integration. Those pillars have been identified by members themselves as essential to sustainable finance reform. In addition, a progression matrix at the end, you can see the different shades of green. It maps country maturity according to 6 stages of progress toward developing and implementing sustainable finance frameworks. In the global and country reports, we start by assessing comprehensiveness and clarity of the policies developed by currently 22 countries. In addition, this year, we particularly dive deeper into the effectiveness of implementation and evidence of behavior change of the banks. And in addition, we also have 42 case studies captured in the global report. I mentioned you have the presentation in front of you. It's very small items there, but at each bar, if you have that presentation, each bar in the chart represents one country. And the colored bars indicate the number of countries that have that indicator covered in their national policies. So we have 3 pillars and 19 indicators. Let's look at the first, strategic alignment. So I'll just only highlight a couple of our findings. So strategic alignment. So the assessment indicated that SDGs and the Paris Agreement are widely acknowledged among the SBN members as 2 key global drivers for their national sustainable finance initiative. And in most of our countries, SBN countries, developing sustainable finance framework has been a collective process involving both public, private stakeholders, as well as the civil society. Second pillar, on the climate and green finance, the green bonds has emerged as a key driver of the national green and climate finance development. 14 countries have developed green bond guidelines that substantially align with or directly reference international standards. And these 14 countries, 11 of them have developed and launched the policy in the last 2 years. Of course, it's not all good news. There are also areas for improvement. That's for the climate green finance. Robust effort to understand and assess financial market risk and opportunity related to climate change have not yet begun in any significant way in most member countries. It's a key gap. I think most countries, when we started our journey, particularly 7 years ago, 5 years, is because of particular environment, social issue in their own countries. I think the cross-border issue of climate change become more important in the last 2 years. So we see more and more, but I think we haven't seen that significant way in the policy and principles yet. Then the third pillar, ESG integration. The management of ESG risk is shifting from being a niche to a widespread expectations of both regulator and industry practices. All 22 countries assessed have issued guidelines covering the ESG integration. And the Equator Principles and IFC performance standards are among the most referenced international standards by SBN members. Again, area for improvement, if you see the bar earlier, so when there's more gray shades, that the area for improvement, even the ESG, it's relatively doing very well, but I think more work needs to be done, particularly on the enforcement mechanism and also reporting. When you read the report, there's some recommendations. My last slide. So the previous slides is assessed by the indicators. And this slide, what I mentioned is the progression matrix maps country according to the 6 stages of development identified by members. So some kind of highlights. Over the past 2 years, 24 of the 38 SBN member countries progressed to the next stage in this progress matrix. And you can see there's some signs. Some countries have 2 stages acceleration and some 1, but other countries also progress within the stage. And for the first time, 2 countries entered the mature stage, China and Indonesia, showing evidence of banks' behavior change toward good ESG practice and increased climate financing. You can find the market-wide data of these 2 countries from the case study section. And 16 countries have not yet launched a policy framework. 4 of them newly joined SBN, committing to develop policy actions in the next 2 years. 6 of them are in the process of formulating sub-stage policy and principles. In fact, 2 of them launched policies in the last 2 months, but it's after our cut-off days. So these updates will be reflected in the next progress report. But we made a footmark, so that's reflect actually happening in the last 2 months. But I want to emphasize the progress matrix reflect the theory of change of all the measurement work. It's not about ranking. It almost doesn't matter where you are today. It matters you were yesterday and you're going to be tomorrow. So the theory of change is about continued progress. And we will make all this data. There's so much data. You can see 220 pages of 30 countries and the collective and undersize. So we make all this available online analytical tool soon, at definitely end of this year. And so you can really use them for your own development of the national policy, but you also can do benchmark either on regional or global or by indicators. And with that, I want these reports were developed by and for members, and we encourage you to use them for your own countries, but also please take the lead to disseminate this incredible knowledge to your region and global broadly. Thank you.
Rong, thank you very much. Very helpful summary of the highlights of the report. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to turn to a roundtable discussion, and from then we will go into a group discussion. But first we have a select group of speakers here to my left, and I'm going to pose each one of them some questions. But we're very lucky to have with us a capital markets regulator, a central bank governor, and a vice president from the World Bank Group. And that's not me, that's Ethiopia's. So we have Ms. Nazira Hayat, who is the president of the Moroccan Capital Markets Authority and also the co-chair of the SBN Green Bond Working Group. On my immediate left, we have Mr. Koba. Koba, I know you, and I always call you Koba, and I can't. How do I?
Don't try. It's a bit difficult.
Okay. So, but I'm not being familiar, but I always call Koba Koba. Koba, who is the governor and chairman of the board of the National Bank of Georgia, and Ethiopia's Tafara, who's the World Bank Group FAMIGA vice president. So, Neza, if I can start with you. One of the major findings of the SBN Global Report is that green bond development has helped accelerate the greening of financial markets in different aspects, including advancing market understanding of what is green and creating a convergence of standards. You've been the co-chair of the SBN Green Bond Working Group, providing leadership and sharing your experience to the broader SBN community. What are your observations, including the challenges and opportunities? How can the World Bank Group and SBN network help bridge some of these gaps?
Okay, good afternoon. Well, thank you.
I think Bridget's bringing it closer.
Huh? I can put it closer. Okay. Can you hear me?
Now you can speak.
Is it okay?
No, it's green.
I'm not very good at technology. Well, anyway, first let me thank you for allowing me to share our Moroccan experience as a Moroccan Capital Markets Authority to promote green and sustainability bonds, including challenges and what we see as opportunities after 3 years' experience since we decided to play an active role within the national roadmap for financial sector in Morocco, disclosed and launched during COP22 in Marrakesh. Our experience would not have been as efficient and successful without the support of global networks and institutions such as IFC and SBN, because it allowed us to benefit from larger experiences and helped us define frameworks and approaches in line with the best international practices. Maybe as regard the insights brought up by the latest SBN Progress report, as Ron introduced it, there are set a number of encouraging facts, such as in the expansion of the SBN community, all the considerable advances that this community has made, because almost all members countries showed progress in the implementation stage. As you said, 20 out of 38 moved at least one stage in the sustainable finance reform. I was happy to see that we had Morocco come from developing to advancing. But what is more important, it's, as you said, it's the evolution and not really the ranking. And what is also important is to find out, to see how sustainable finance is really gaining attraction, and that it is becoming, we see it within our IOSCO, a core concern of market regulators, and it is more and more at the heart of financial markets reform. Commitments of members are being translated into concrete actions that foster the integration of sustainable development into financial activities, thus moving towards mainstreaming sustainable finance. What I see from what has been disclosed in your global progress report, but also what we have been experiencing in Morocco, the challenges today to be addressed in order to reach the ultimate goals of greening financial markets and financing the SDG. I find that the first challenge is time. We have to move quickly in a coordinating way to reach the SDGs. Indeed, financial gaps are huge, and all financial markets are called upon to contribute to the transition towards a green, low-carbon economy. A second challenge is harmonization. All these local frameworks need to be aligned with international standards. However, they should also be harmonized among local components of financial services industry, as well as coherent with local objectives in terms of sustainable development. Sustainable finance should be thought of as an integrated approach to be deployed across the whole industry to be effective in driving change and avoid eviction effects between capital markets and banking industry, for instance. As we have said, seen it in our country where we don't have the same level of progress regarding this matter. So this requires an involvement and collaboration of all stakeholders in a concession vision. As I said it previously, we we started to act after we launched a national roadmap for sustainable finance, but yet not everyone is having the same path in progressing. The third challenge is behavior change. Market participants should understand and learn to manage ESG risks as part of their core activity. And this paradigm shift requires considerable efforts at various levels. Well, first, which is everyone agrees, capacity building among market participants remains critical. Regulators, professional and usual financial services should modify their processes to embed ESG aspects into their activity, which calls for guidance and targeted training. Second, transparency and ESG reporting should become mainstream in order to allow for an effective climate risk management at individual and aggregate levels. Despite all these exacting challenges, there are also opportunities for advancing sustainable finance globally. The most important opportunity that should be leveraged is the momentum observed globally for mobilizing the financial sector towards financing green economies. As we could see in the SBN Global Progress report, regulators and policymakers are driving change through concrete actions in fulfillment of their engagements. Also, we observe a shift in the regulation philosophy. Regulators today have embraced a more important development role in their mandates and accordingly are deploying innovative approaches compared to traditional supervision of the markets. So this is what we've done at the Moroccan Capital Markets Authority. We adopted, we wanted to be efficient, wanted to participate to this, to the national roadmap and the objective of the country regarding sustainable development. So we find out, well, that an innovative approach could be with the new tools to be used. We published voluntary guidelines. We also looked for all stakeholders' engagement, and we developed capacity building action as well as mandatory regulation. And what was important is that our approach has been progressive in bringing this matter. We started with sustainable financial instruments, and we ended by ESG reporting to the market. So we published a series of guidelines, green bonds, with the support of IFC, corporate social responsibility and ESG reporting. And the final one was social and sustainability bonds, which is completely in line with the new model of the sustainable development that the country is looking for. Each of these guidelines was not just developed by ourselves with AFC, but we presented it to the public for consultation. We asked for feedback in order to make sure that the framework were also well comprehensive and at the same time aligned with international standard and corresponded to the local realities of the Moroccan market. Today we can say that market participants are also responding positively to the reform since we have built consensus among the necessity to green the financial system. We have seen very positive feedback after each of our actions for sustainable finance, be the issuance of sustainable financial instrument, the voluntary ESG reporting, etc. I must say that global networks like SBN have today reached a degree of maturity and gathered enough experience, knowledge, and data to make them a real driving force for guiding transformation of financial system worldwide. And it's important, and we're very happy to be part of this action. Maybe another opportunity is that we, at least in my region, there are many efforts to interconnect financial markets. Today, there's a work to integrate West African markets, and I think sustainable finance should be included during the COP22. I wanted to just remind that we have had exchanges and capital markets regulator from the continent committing in promoting and greening capital markets, and this issue is addressed in all the work that is being done to integrate the markets. And of course, best practices and the experiences after these 4 or 5 years, they are more easily identified thanks to all this global sharing of records and results. Maybe a question, how can World Bank Group and SBN help bridge some of the gaps? Continue doing what has been done, like incentivize policymakers to advance reforms for sustainable finance by integrating, for instance, this aspect in the various assessment programs at countries like FSAP and reform recommendation. They should be included. Another idea would be a suggestion to put in place, if possible, funding for reforms and initiatives aiming at fostering sustainable sustainable finance in the countries, or at least to help capacity building. Provide advisory services. That's what we got from IFC, while for our sustainable instrument guidelines, and generally, continue the working with countries through a program like GCAP, where we are, where Morocco is one of the countries involved. Well, for SBN, everything that has been done, like research, monitoring, and dissemination of best practices in the field of sustainable finance, and I can assure you that we will do our best in Morocco to be the ambassador of this report, which is not easy because it's a tough report, and but we will also, by disseminating it, we will use comments and reactions from the financial community to help advance and to maybe see other suggestions. Of course, help with capacity building in member countries and develop practical toolkits for sustainable finance development. Third, I think that all these events that you're organizing to share experiences at the occasion of the launch of a guideline or when a new member is integrating the network is very valuable. It is, it helps because we have the feeling that we are already at the very beginning, since many other issues have not been totally addressed, like all risk, the risks linked to the climate change and to these products. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That was very helpful to lay out what you thought of the challenges, the harmonization, the behavior change, and the complimentary remarks about the value that SBN is bringing. I very much appreciate your thoughts. I will now turn to Koba. Koba, the National Bank of Georgia has started its sustainable finance journey when you joined SBN 2 years ago. And in just a short time, MBG has developed and issued a sustainable finance roadmap, which was issued in April of this year, benefiting from SBN's collective experience and lessons learned. So I understand that this is the first such roadmap in the ECA region. So I thank you as Vice President of ECA. And NBG plans to share the experience with other central banks in the region. And again, I thank you for that ambition. So what have you learned through these efforts over the last 2 years? Where has SBN helped? Where would you see the international partnership most helpful beyond giving you the mic?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Georgina, and thank you for inviting me at this event. And it's nice to see our counterparts. When we decided to join SBN, you rightly said it was 2 years ago. We have had the list of priorities which had to be done in the National Bank of Georgia. And we had quite a lot of challenges to deal with. We have floating exchange rate regime in the country, and it's a small open economy. So you may imagine how many challenges we have been and we are encountering in quite sort of turbulent period of time. Then I became to know about this through our local office. Jan is not here. He just left. Okay. Yes. And so we have been planning to create the new department, Financial Stability Department. And given that, it had to focus on financial stability, of course, it had to produce report about financial stability. And given that central bank is always oriented on not what is going to happen tomorrow, but what's going to happen in the long term, then we thought that this will be a good opportunity for us to start working on this issue, even though some ideas which we saw here could have been sort of very far from us, if you look at from the perspective of where we were 2 years ago. And then we decided to do that. So we put it in priorities of the central bank, and we started to work very actively. So we became a member of SBN in 2017, and by our joining, we expressed willingness and commitment to support sustainable finance development in Georgia. And since then, we have been working with IFC and with SBN on many directions. This cooperation has been very productive for us, and with the guidance of IFC SBN, we have made progress towards sustainable finance framework development. And there were quite a few things we learned through this journey and through these efforts. So I want to highlight some of them. First of all, it was very important to start the process with publishing of Sustainable Finance Roadmap. And in order to understand what it had to entail, we had a lot of consultation with some member countries and with SBN. So for us, it serves two main purposes. So it informs the market about regulators' future steps regarding sustainable finance and prepares it for transitioning to sustainable finance. So we wanted market to know, so this is what we are starting. We have quite developed banking system in the region, and banks who had heard about this from other countries and from other regulators got immediately very interested. And so the second thing which we put in Sustainable Finance Roadmap is that we wanted it to support incorporation of sustainability issues into decision-making by providing coherent and consistent actions and allowing time for the system to adapt. So it was not something that we are going to put on the system very urgently, but we wanted them to understand how it works and to give some time for preparation. So we launched our roadmap for sustainable finance in Georgia in April 2019, and it summarizes all possible actions that the National Bank of Georgia intends to implement regarding sustainable development. I think that it worked with our sector because it provided a credible and predictable, at the same time somehow somewhat stable regulatory framework and prepared the market for transitioning to sustainable finance. I think that the cooperation which we got during this period of time with the SBN and IFC was very important. It was a very important partnership, especially for new countries which had just joined this initiative, and the guidance of organizations and expertise which already existed was very important for us. It is becoming very common to incorporate environmental and social sustainability in the central bank policies, and we are also doing that. And as Georgina noted, we are the first in ICA region who took this initiative and made steps towards the development of sustainable finance. I've been working also with my colleagues, and actually one of the countries, I cannot claim that they joined after my discussion and conversation, but I suspect that that was the case. And actually I'm also I'm explaining the governor also to join another very good, already established initiative with RAMP, with the World Bank, and I hope it's going to also happen soon. But this was a sort of first step, right? But besides the roadmap, we benefited from cooperation with SBN in many other ways. With the support of IFC, we integrated environmental, social, and governance, so-called ESG considerations, into corporate governance code for commercial banks. So, well, we are a regulator, not only for banking system, but in Georgia, we are also a regulator for capital markets. Sometimes capital market representatives are not very happy about it. They think that we are favoring always commercial banks, which is not true. So these considerations, ESG considerations now, they are integrated into corporate governance code for commercial banks, but we intend to integrate them for capital markets as well. And we are giving them some time to know this, to understand how it's going to work. ESG disclosure, and at the same time, we asked commercial banks, and for them, this is already mandatory, so it was incorporated in corporate governance code, which we also, by the way, did together with IFC. IFC consulted us on corporate governance code. And NBG, now we are working, so it is already mandatory, but they have to disclose it starting from 2020. And now we are in the preparation of ESG reporting and disclosure principles. And we are also asking the members how it's going to work and what will be the best way to do that. But again, commercial banks are already aware that by 2020 they have to do this. And then next will be capital markets. Another area where National Bank of Georgia has received support of SBN was organizing workshops. And it is very useful to participate and to organize workshops on sustainable finance developments because it's a platform to share experience of countries and participants who have already done that. Of course, we are far from two countries you mentioned. It was Indonesia and China, right? Which already, the country which reached the stage. But we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we are going to continue in that direction. So with SBN IFC support, National Bank of Georgia organized sustainable finance workshops in September in 2018, a year ago, and Ron also was with us. in Tbilisi. And by end of October this year, in just about 2 weeks, we will have another workshop, and I'm very excited that this event will take place in Georgia. This time we have invited more central bank representatives, more associations and capital market authorities. So we hope that this event will be even more interesting. We got quite a lot of questions and interest from commercial banks, as well as, by the way, microfinance institutions, which are sort of trying to always sort of copy whatever commercial banks are doing. And given that we also started to regulate non-banking financial institutions, they very carefully observe our actions with commercial banks, because at some point, what we have with microfinance institutions, it's a light supervision, but it's gonna be covered. And actually, they are benefiting quite a lot because more donors are getting interested with microfinance institutions. So it's natural that now they are interested in what it is and what benefit it can bring for the development. So with all these efforts and really quite a full agenda of reforms which National Bank of Georgia is implementing, I'm happy that we were able to give enough resources and time for development of and for starting to work on this issue. And we are happy that in just about 2 years, it was acknowledged, and now Georgia moved from commitment to developing stage. But despite these achievements, we understand that there is still more to be done. We are exploring the ways to address sustainable finance issues, including possible regulatory actions, but we want to understand very well what will be the consequences of it. And again, so after this, so now we are in a way more active stage, right? So it becomes even more important for us to plan what we are going to do, because we are talking about very important sector for the economy, for commercial banks, and we have to make sure that the direction we choose is not becoming either burdensome or difficult for them to do. But again, we have an understanding, they understand, we know that they understand where we are going. And as long as we have a good dialogue with them, I think we'll be able to find the balanced approach. So overall, I think that Georgia's experience with SBN and IFC have been quite effective and useful for us. When we joined initiative, our approach was that we had to hurry sort of patiently. We did not want to make any records or anything, but we just wanted to make sure that we go through this way in a sustainable way. I think that's what we are doing. But again, we have allocated resources and we have tasked our financial stability department to do that. And I think that this can be, I mean, others have to say that, but I think that Georgia has been a good example to see how you can start working in this direction if there is a willingness to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Koba. Extremely interesting to hear how you have led in the region. As I say, I honor you for that. Thank you also for yet again hosting the workshop at the end of October. But when you described the roadmap and the consultation, I think that is something that everyone can learn from, because as has been said, people are at countries are at different level of development, and that is something that everybody will have to go through if they have not already. So my final question is for Ethiopius. So Ethiopius, you've played a leadership role in guiding and supporting the work of SBN over the years, drawing on your experience at the US SEC as a capital markets and as your role as the Vice President for Sustainability at Risk at IFC. So in your new role at MIGA, how will you see the different dimensions of the SBN contribution to the global sustainability agenda? What do you see as the key impacts achieved by SBN to date? And what would be your recommendations for the future?
So I'll offer a few observations about the past and then share a few thoughts about the future of SBN. My first observation has to do with the power of networks. It's remarkable. This was a group of 8 to 10 members back in 2010. Now represents 38 members, 85% of the banking assets in emerging markets, and that's a remarkable trajectory in 9 years' time. And I think the strength of the network is threefold. One, it's based on mutual support. This is a network that came together to share experiences, to share ideas, very pragmatic and very practical. And I think that's made a huge difference in the growth. Two, it's bottom up. It's not top down. This is not a network that was put together by the G20. It was not imposed from above. It was organic in the way it came about. And I'm not sure, having worked on G20 initiatives, it would have grown in the way that it has had it been top down. So I think it's remarkable. Notwithstanding, it's caught the attention of the G20, and the G20 has sought input and feedback once the network achieved a certain size and a certain reputation. And I'd like to think, actually, that the NGFS found inspiration in the SBN, and I think that's another impact that the SBN has had. The other thing that I think contributes to the strength of the network is that it's a public-private partnership, right? This is, unlike many other places, a form in which you have both the public sector and the private sector in conversation about what is required to actually green the financial system. And that doesn't happen very often in these sorts of fora. And I don't think the progress would have been as significant as it has been had it not been for having both banking associations and bank supervisors and central banks together talking about what it will take to green the financial system. My second observation has to do with the axiom that what gets measured gets done, right? So it's very interesting to see that today, following 2 progress reports, the number of roadmaps, implementation plans, guidance, and the like that have emerged. And I would urge you to continue down the path of measuring progress. I think in designing the progress report, we took the wise decision of avoiding, we took advantage of our natural competitive natures, right? And I think that's something that's very, very good to do. But we avoided sort of the toxic ranking system that you see and that has been part of the difficulties with the Doing Business report, which is a remarkable report, but sometimes there's noise around it because people are trying to figure out why am I 25th and, my neighbor is 24th. Whereas here we're talking about categories of progression, and I think that's made a huge difference in maintaining the competitive spirit, but allowing for people to find comfort with where they find themselves in their progression. I would urge that you continue down this path because I think, as I said, what gets measured gets done. My last set of observations are with respect to the future. And both Nezat and Koba have touched upon this. I think the network needs to think about the inclusion of financiers beyond banks. You're really not going to green the financial system unless you're looking at all sources of capital. Banks are not the only source of capital. There are other sources of capital, and they should be urged to actually be part of this effort to figure out how to actually provide financing to projects, to companies and the like that are thinking about environmental and social impact. So that means capital markets, that means insurance companies, and I, as a newly minted insurer, will be thinking about that from my standpoint. But let's see whether or not we can actually broaden this group. And maybe not in the immediate, because there's a lot of work to be done, but at some point, the network may want to be a little bit more inclusive beyond banks and bank supervisors. Second, I'm a former securities regulator, so in addition to knowing that what gets measured gets done, I also know that transparency is important. When you go to law school in the United States, you study one of the justices who came up with this famous phrase that goes something like, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the truth is, when you have to report something, you pay attention to both what you're reporting and how you're reporting it, right? And I think there's work to be done on broader disclosure around ESG by banks and others, because I think that too will focus the mind. And that will focus the minds of those who are actually trying to get to change behavior, right? So I think there's thought to be given to the disclosure regime around ESG. And Nazat, quite rightly, has been pushing IOSCO and securities regulators to accelerate their work here, because they're a little bit behind. And I can say this as a former securities regulator. I say this to them all the time. You guys are late to the party when it comes to disclosure on ESG. And until you actually mandate it and you realize this is material information to investors, you're not going to change the behavior of companies. And it's critical to do so. My final note or thing to think about for the future is standardizing data. Investors need to be able to compare investment opportunities, right? Those who allocate capital. It's very hard to actually compare opportunities if the reporting and the data is not standardized in some fashion or another. That's been the power of the international financial reporting standards, is that when you have companies across the world reporting in accordance with the same standard, investors can look at opportunities around the world and know they're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. There's some work to be done there, I think, with respect to ESG reporting as well. But again, that's something for the future. There's a lot of work to do in the short term, but certainly something to think about for the SBN going forward. And final note, it's been an honor to actually work with this group and be part of this group in your capacity, Georgina. I will continue to be a supporter and continue to find ways for MIGA to be involved in the work of the SBN, particularly if you start expanding to insurers. So thank you very much.
Ethiopians, thank you. We will miss you, but hopefully we will bring you back when you start to represent the insurers that no doubt we will bring into this group. But thank you for the reflection on the power of networks. It's true. It's very true, and we've seen that both with the performance and not performance standards, the equator banks, where we're at 95, 98. We need to get to 100. Anyway, thank you very much. I think we should, team, give a round of applause to our panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know people put a lot of work into their remarks, so thank you very much. So we're now going to have a quick round table. I'm going to call on many of you to answer questions. The general question is going to be about the key impact that you have achieved at the operational level of your financial market in your country. What is the key challenge, and what should SBN focus on in the next 2 to 3 years? But in recognition that everyone is at different levels, I have slightly individualized questions. And May, I'm going to start with you because you were nodding at things that Koba was saying because they were resonating with you. So I wanted to pick on you first, if I may. So the Central Bank of Egypt joined SBN very recently. And I understand that you're in the process of preparing guidelines. Can you share with us your plan, how you're going about things? Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. We've joined in 2019, but we attended a meeting of SBN in 2017. And ever since, we've been working. We didn't stop. So we've actually drafted the guidelines. And we go through this regulation setting process whereby we do first internal consultation on the level of the central bank. And this is currently taking place. There's a challenge there that we are facing because internally we have a huge debate whether to issue it as a regulation or as a guidelines. And there are several departments who are for and against, but in general, I think the direction will be that we issue sort of a discussion paper and do a consultation on the level of the industry using the Federation of Banks who are present here also. This will allow us to at least do a gap analysis with the banks, like tell them to give us a plan on where they stand compared to those educational guidelines, I would say. And then shortly after, and depending on the level of where the banks stand, we would decide to issue the guidelines. I believe this will take place hopefully during 2020, I would say. But we're not only at this point. We have two other parallel tracks taking place at the same time, one of which is that we mandated the Egyptian Banking Institute, our training arm, to start putting together training workshops and seminars for the bankers, for the middle-level management and for the top management. And another track is we have internally at the central bank a department that is called Banking Reform Department, and this department is actually doing a pilot project on the largest state-owned banks in coordination with the largest state-owned bank to do a minor gap analysis to start with, to know where they stand. This will benefit us very much once we move to the issuance of the guidelines. I think that's it. We're working diligently and hopefully we'll be there very shortly. Thank you.
Sikoba, you're a beacon of light. This is fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Maybe I can turn to the central bank, the China Banking Insurance Regulator Commission, Mr. Ye. You're at the opposite end of the spectrum. You've been, you're the co-chair of the measurement committee, but you launched your guidelines 7 years ago. So there is a wealth of experience that maybe you can share with us. What did you observe as the biggest challenges amongst the Chinese banks because of the guidelines? And what is the current priority for you in green credit?
Actually, our agency as a banking regulators, we have started the green credit policy many years ago. Actually, it started 2007. That's our first version of the green credit guidelines. So now 12 years has passed, and in 2012. We issued our second version of which is of green credit guidelines, and then in 2013 we have established our green credit statistics, and 2014 we have established formulate some kind of key indicators for the implementation of our green credit policy. And now we have the policy framework, we have the statistics, and we have some kind of supervision, right? Because every year we ask the banks, the major banks, to make their own self-assessment of the implementation of our green credit guidelines, and they have to submit their self-assessment to us, and then get this assessment report. We'll ask the China Banking Association to organize some expertise to review what they have done with the self-assessment, what they have achieved, what they haven't achieved. For this review processing, the China Banking Association will report the result of the review, and then we'll ask bank come to the CBRC to tell them what they have achieved, especially what they haven't achieved. So for the next year, they have to make further changes, further improvement. So generally, we have some kind of closed circle from the framework to the monitoring to the implementation or supervision. So for the future, the challenge, I think that first we need some more push from outside, from internal side, from internal side. The one thing I just wonder, whether the SBN could work together with World Bank and IMF, so that ask them to, because every 5 years they have done some kind of FSAP for the major countries. So if the FSAP has some component on the sustainable finance, and the country regulators and the country's financial sectors will get a big push to do more. Yeah, that's very important. The second one is the transparency. Mr. SOP Tafla has mentioned that. That's very, very important. We ask the banks to disclose the aggregated data of their green credit statistics. In the future, we may ask them to disclose the data based on the projects. So, in that sense, they will get more public attentions. So they will push more to improve their practice. Yeah. The third one is that, you see, in China, there's a lot of larger banks. They have many long-term assets, and many long-term assets actually is carbon-intensive assets. As regulators, we are very concerned of the quality of the assets for the long term. So if the SBN or maybe SBN may work with others to have developed some kind of stress testing methodologies, that would be wonderful. Because in general, we hope that when a bank makes decisions, they could take into account the carbon factors. So, and for the financial stability reasons, we hope that we can see that for the long term, whether the financial sector or banking sector is safe enough, considering the unprecedented changes in carbon price or something like that. Yeah. So personally, if IOC the country office or World Bank country office could help us to organize some kind of small workshop and to tell them how to do some kind of stress testing relating to the carbon factors, that'd be wonderful. It will help them to improve their decision making.
Randy was nodding, so maybe you've cornered him. Yes. But and your remarks on whether with the pushing the IMF on the FSAP to include sustainable finance, very, very good point. I'll try and use my interactions with the IMF to introduce that idea. Thank you. Oh, okay. I was unaware, so thank you. Oh, you're awake.
Actually, Georgina, it would be interesting if somehow
you need to. Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The progression matrix as being part of the FSAP. That would actually be. It would join up the efforts in very interesting ways. Because basically the FSAPs are about a standard. So what standard are you going to point to? That's probably the most we have at this point, but could be very useful in terms of pushing people.
So, team, we're making progress. This is excellent. Giorgio. Hi. So we've heard from a central bank governor who's on the early stages, and we've heard from the Deputy Director General of a regulatory commission, as the General Secretary of FELABAN, the Latin America Federation, a banking association that I will be speaking to very soon. I wanted to turn to you next. FELABAN's been playing a leading role in mobilizing banking associations in the region to advance sustainable finance. Can you Can you speak to the common challenges and opportunities that the LAC region is facing, and how IFC and SBN may help you?
It's thinking in the profitability, no? The green, but the dollar green, no the green sustainability.
The green dollar.
Then, with the support of the IFC, working for change the thinking of the bankers, no? The importance on the sustainability impact to the region and the bankers, no? Thank all the IFC, Pierre, Ethiopia's Carlos, I am compared to the obispo.
He became an evangelist of green.
Of green in the region. No? Now that the 2016, working with the IFC, now have 10 associations working together, and 10 to 38.
10 from 38. So almost 1/3 of the Sustainable Banking Network comes from Latin America.
Yes.
In only 3 years.
Yes, 3 years only, no? While there is still much to be done, support at the level of banking association was critical, no? In the adoption of signing of green protocols has been vital to the adoption to the better practice in the social green. Now, for example, have the assembly in Felaban in Miami. Is the best, most important meeting in the region. 2,000 people that 16 countries, bankers, president of bankers arrived at this meeting in Miami. And all of the first day is dedicated to the financial sustainability. No? You open the President Piñera. I called the President Piñera for support previous the COP in Chile. No arrived at the assembly, but send the video for Chile before your presentation. No, no, you are happy with the logros, ¿cómo se llama?
With the achievements so far. Yeah. And just to complement the brilliant work that Giorgio has been leading in the region with the banking associations, we are extremely happy, no? Because Giorgio was mentioning that we have seen a great acceleration at the level of banks embedding sustainability at a strategic portfolio and transactional level, no? And every day more and more across different businesses areas, no? And in doing this, it has been fundamental, as Giorgio was explaining to me, the capacity building effort. The capacity building and the knowledge effort has been fundamental, because this is one of the main barriers, because he was mentioning that, of course, the end customers of banks, they are not going to come and say, I want to be green. They are fighting to survive, small and mid-sized enterprises. Banks really need to be very proactive. And it has been fundamental, the role of the banking associations under the leadership of Felaban to convey these capacity building efforts and to establish green protocols in several of the associations that have created the framework. And we are seeing more and more banks aligning their particular goals with the Sustainable Development Goals and with responsible banking as well, no? So far, Giorgio was telling me that Latin America, he feels that there is a lot of work to be done yet, especially on the climate risk angle, because there have been advances on products and services, but most of the banks, they are still not considering the financial impact of climate in their portfolio. And there is an area which is particularly important for them, and they are working with the trying also to work with the regulators and central banks in order to bring that. No?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was
Teamwork.
It was a bit of a trick question.
We work together.
I knew that it was. I mean, the countries of Latin America are very, very different. Brazil to El Salvador. So to imagine that you could corral all these cats, it's a very hard job. So it was a little bit of a trick question for me. I do apologize. But I knew.
There's some problem. Huh?
I know. Thank you. Finally, maybe I could turn to our newest member, the Central Bank of Samoa, Mavia. As our newest member and the second member from the Pacific Islands after Fiji, maybe you could describe to us a little bit about what you see as the priorities for Samoa in sustainable finance and how SBN can help you, what you're looking for from us.
Well, thank you very much for that. I must say that Samoa is very excited to join SBN. I'm not sure how excited our commercial banks are, but I'll know that in the next few months. As you are aware, as a small island state in the Pacific, we are highly vulnerable to extreme natural disasters. On average, we get a natural disaster every 5 years. So our government has recognized the challenges presented by climate change and has undertaken several measures. So our key focus or key actions to be undertaken is to promote and raise awareness about sustainable finance in Samoa's financial system, and also to prepare technical guidelines or policy frameworks to advance sustainable finance with a focus on green growth lending by our financial institutions. So we will work collaboratively with the commercial banks and government ministries to ensure consistency in the country's efforts to address the growing environmental challenges facing the country. And we would welcome the availability of any technical assistance for our Bankers Association to compile their set of lending principles or guidelines for the advancement of sustainable finance in Samoa. The Central Bank of Samoa has already have credit line facilities that were set up that the IMF called non-conventional monetary tools. So to assist the economy following the GFC and natural disasters that affected the country since 2009. 2009 we had a tsunami. 2012 we had another cyclone, and also to 2018 we had another cyclone. So the credit line facilities were offered to assist with disaster recoveries. So the initiatives for SBN will also serve to meet the inclusive green finance initiatives and vice versa for the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. And one recent initiative that the Central Bank of Samoa that can count under both the SBN and the inclusive green finance initiatives of AFI is the first carbon offset polymer 10-dollar banknote that was issued into circulation to commemorate the 16th Pacific Games that was hosted by Samoa in July this year. So this might be the first ever carbon offset banknote that has been issued, but it's one of the initiatives that we work towards in trying to sensitize our people on sustainable finance. So that's just a brief update from Samoa. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations on, I don't know either whether it's the first carbon offset banknote, but it sounds very exciting. You're clearly leadership from Samoa there. So maybe I can turn now to my World Bank colleagues. So Per, Jamie, Katia, is there anything that you would like, listening to this conversation, is there anything that you feel we could add, anything that we should be doing more or differently, anything that you would want to bring to the table at this point? Carlos, I think you've spoken already, so. Yes, Carlos is out, yes.
Just joking. No, so just a couple points, right? I think, and I will refer to Carlos because on the education point, and I think, Mai, you were referring to it as well, what you're trying to do in Egypt about how do you educate bankers, right? Mm-hmm. That is a very critical part, right? So we've talked a lot within SBN about how do you help the regulators and the banking associations do what they need to do, but I think there's the next level of what needs to get done, which is really at the market level. And so what are the right ways of doing this, right? I mean, in Latin America, you've co-launched the IFC Green Banking Academy with Felaban as a way to basically do some of this. We have a nice resource on the World Bank side as well that we're trying to leverage to bring in there. But I think that's one question that I think going forward will be quite important as to how do we really make lasting change and transformation really happen in the market, right? And I think the Global Progress Report is trying to move into that, right? So it's policies and guidance is the first step, but how do we get really the markets to change? The second part, I think, is about the measurement topic, right? I mean, after this meeting, we have a meeting with the NGFS as well, which is obviously concerned about this as well. And I think that goes beyond just, a lot into green and brown, right? I mean, so because a lot of the conversations become very sensitive very quickly, right, about the debate that we had about brown punishing factors and green rewarding factors. What can central banks do to be kind of more active in this space, right, with all of the instruments that are at their disposal? And I think going back to, the point that was made about, I think Ethiopia's when we're saying it can't just be a banking network, right? It really has to look at the whole of the financial markets, and that really opens up many more instruments and many more avenues of really directing flow. So I think that part, and how do you then measure that, right? How do you really know how much, what are the brown assets in the systems, what are the green assets? I think that's one where a lot still has to be done. And I think, Georgina, to your point about invoking the World Bank is already starting to be very active on FSUPs and so on, but the IMF is really the key player to work with when it comes to these measurement systems, right? Because central banks report, of course, to both World Bank and IMF, but the IMF International Financial Statistics and Reporting Frameworks are the gold standard for central banks as to what should be reported upon on their financial system.
Maybe just to add on IMF is absolutely key, and I understand Kristalina was having a session yesterday, I think, and she did announce that green and FSAPs is becoming one of her priorities. That's something that hasn't been articulated. There had been quite a lot of discussions in the IMF. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but we have started to do through, and now it's a number of a few countries. Bangladesh was the first one. We're working on a couple of others with our other colleagues in FCI, and developing a standard methodology that would incorporate all of the various aspects into FSAP. And I think it was very comforting to hear that Kristalina has now made it public and one of the priorities. So I wanted to share that. I wasn't there, but that was what colleague said. I also want to comment on the power of networks and what we've been doing also in the bank on bank side, supporting the finance ministers coalition for climate action. That's something that has been launched during the spring meetings with a few founding members. Right now, there are 48 finance ministers, and they're discussing their action plan that they all understand that they're at quite different level of capital market developments. They are committed to greening their system, but they obviously recognize the challenges are very different at different levels. So they're trying to align their action plan to the countries that they can take on championship of various aspects. And I understand that action plan, we've seen it, we're supporting it as a secretariat, will probably be launched and endorsed at the COP in Chile. Chile and Finland are the co-chairs for this year as the first co-chairs, which will then be rotated to others. I think that's, they recognize the support of the public policy in greening efforts, and that's very much at the heart of the network.
Yeah, just a couple of things from me. The first is just a nod of congratulations to you all on this. I do, to Ethiopia's point on the, was it the sunshine being the most effective thing? This is a lot of work for all of you, but to all 30 of you to disclose this openly is such a signal. It's a huge signal to do this openly and to share your progress and to track your own progress and to discuss it like this is in the open is really so essential, because the challenge is urgent and the only way to get there quickly is by learning from each other. So I really hats off to you on that. And then there's always a challenge that comes with the congratulations, right? And I hesitate for this because I know how exhausted Rong is from getting this baby out. But, when changing behavior in financial institutions is hard. And the policy is the first step, the regulation is the first step, but ultimately you're changing human behavior and big institutions, and that's about capacity, it's about learning, it's about culture. And when we work at IFC with bank clients and we ask them to put in place risk management systems on the ESG side, or to build a new green business, what we worry about is giving ourselves comfort that we've succeeded by them having a policy on the shelf, but it's not actually changing their behavior. That's our greatest worry, because then we've ticked a box, but we haven't changed anything. And that's for you in your conversations with your members associations and as regulators, that's a similar kind of worry as you get that far and you think you check the box that you've got a policy on the shelf, but you're not changing behavior. And that next step is really hard. And I do challenge you on the next round of progress report to work together to think how to survey, how to look at the resources banks are embedding. Are they resourced? Is the culture, is the behavior changing? Because until behavior is changing, markets aren't changing. So congratulations, but more challenge.
Yes.
Thank you, Jamie. I could trust you to give us a challenge. Maybe, Mary, I could turn to you to sum up what we have learned today. That
Sure. Well, I was scribbling furiously, but I also see we have about 45 seconds left. So let me just go. First off, a big thank you. I mean, everyone's deep commitment to sustainable finance was loud and clear in the conversation, if not in this 10-kilo heavy progress report. It was really good to hear about some of your journeys this afternoon and your challenges, and very nice to hear that SBN, IFC, and the broader bank group has been helpful and that you'd like us to continue to be helpful, and I think we would be delighted to rise to that challenge. To echo Jamie a bit, we can't rest on our laurels. There's more to do in measurement and data, in disclosure and transparency, and capacity building. If we want to ensure that the policy converts into practice, then we're going to need consistent and connected approaches to define, monitor, measure, and report on the risks and the impacts. It's, Ethiopia is always reminding us that what gets measured gets done. I think we really appreciate all of your efforts. We at IFC are proud to be the secretariat of the SBN, to share our expertise and experience, but importantly, to learn from you guys, because we do learn from you in the process. We see this work at SBN as a continuation of the work that we did 16 years ago when we helped with the Equator Principles, and it's a critical lever to advance sustainable finance. So, you should give yourselves a big pat on the back. The members of SBN are collectively driving a systemic shift in the way business is done in the financial sector, and that's exciting. So let me, so that I don't make anyone be late, just thank you again and congratulate you for the great progress. And I think we'll be following up with more detailed notes on the concrete actions that come out of this.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody. I think that concludes this SBN Sustainable Finance Roundtable. I want to thank everybody for their contributions and their attention, and I wish you all happy annual meetings, if that such a thing exists, and hope that we can meet again soon. Well, some of us will be meeting in Georgia, but for all of us, but thank you very much for being part of SBN and for your contributions. I think we're doing great work together. Thank you.
And just one logistic, we have some members online, we have WebEx. So unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but we record all the sessions, so we share broadly with our membership.